In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm festing like Pilates. Why you frontin', you act like you somebody. Keep a trail in the ville, how I go by it. I was stuck in the rut, I was nobody. I've been looking for something to go body. There's an art to the hustle like yo got it. Kid got a kid back in here like a new shotty. In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm...
You know what? Before I even start the video, I'm going to start saying this from earlier on now. I'm going to start saying this from the beginning of the video, since you guys don't tend to watch, some of you guys don't tend to watch till the end of the video sometimes. Before you click off the video, give the content a try. If you like my content, you should subscribe. You should subscribe, comment, share, give this video a like, all of those things to help with the algorithm. That's all. We can get on to the video now. Yo, what's good, Time Clan? It is your boy Time next here, back with another video, and this video is going to be something interesting. This video is going to be about Deku being Wretched Egg from the series Dead Man Wonderland. If you guys have never heard of this series, I strongly recommend that you watch it or read the manga, because of the fact that the anime ends up diverting from the manga. It basically takes away some of the characters and ends up kind of turning it into its own thing later on. But even then, for a couple of episodes I did end up watching, because I watched this back in the day when I was really younger, back when I didn't really know about how to find manga and all of that. All I knew was that Shiro was interesting. Shiro's abilities were interesting. The fact that they were a wretched egg, that was interesting. And now I come back to this years later, and I'm thinking, why not do a what if on her? Or, well, what if Deku was wretched egg? So in this series, here's how things are going to go. Things would actually start off pretty typical. In this world, quirks were the dominant thing. 80% of the population had quirks, 20% did not have any quirks. And when it came on to Inko, she was no different. She ended up being born with a quirk. A relatively weak telekinesis quirk though. Attraction of small objects, and even then, it didn't seem to be all that suited to Hero Wake. She ended up actually going into an interesting career path. She ended up becoming a scientist. Although she became a scientist, that did not necessarily mean she was just going to be stuck to the laboratory all of the time. She had some interactions. She ended up meeting a man one day by the name of Hasashi. They actually just clicked as soon as they met each other, and from there on they just mixed their energy, you could say. Their energy was just off the charts. Their energy just worked together so wonderfully. It just mixed together so wonderfully that it didn't take them very long to actually get married. And you know what happens when people do get married, although it isn't as frequently nowadays. You all would know what I'm saying. Basically, people tend to end up having kids when they get married as well. Although nowadays it's not as frequent, it still does happen here. What ends up happening is that when they had a child, they named this child Izuku Midoriya. He originally had, well, green hair and green eyes. But by the age of 4 years old, they ended up discovering something. He was, as you could say, quirkless. This ended up crushing Izuku because of the fact that he always wanted to become a hero alongside his friend Katsuki Bakugo. Unfortunately, that dream would never rise to anything else because of the fact that he was dealt a bad hand. He was quirkless. Quirkless people could not become heroes. It would have been a waste of time to even bother trying. That's coming from the doctor's own words. That's coming from the doctor's own mouth. Inko heard this and she decided to just thank the doctor for his time. She didn't really talk to Izuku for that while. She did not necessarily talk to anybody actually. She ended up just going to her laboratory and just started working from there. She was mixing up a couple of chemicals. She was just doing basically anything, you could say. Until she realized that she could actually do something with Izuku. You see, for a while now, the other scientists at her place of work were trying to come up with some sort of antithesis to having quirks, or, well, no, not having a quirk, you could say. Although it does seem that it would just be having a quirk, it goes a bit deeper than that. And people within the laboratories, people within the laboratory that Inko worked in, they were trying to come up with a way for people to have artificial quirks. People with artificial quirks that could blend into hero society. They wanted more heroes on the streets. Although 80% of the population had quirks, that didn't necessarily mean there couldn't be any more people with quirks. They wanted to basically create something that would also be marketable, and where it would end up being like this. Although you were said to be quirkless, you could actually purchase a way to be able to have a quirk, get to experience what it's like to have a quirk. They were trying to make a quick buck, you could say. Also, at the same time, some of the scientists also had quirkless children. None of them really wanted to actually test them, though. They didn't want to actually put their own kids into the experiment. They were trying for a while to adopt some kids and actually experiment with them from there, but once the government ended up learning about their intentions, they just cancelled it. They tried to get rid of the program immediately, but some of them would still stay into this program. Some of them would still go on with some of the research. Inko was one of the few that were in this. She was relatively close, and she would look at Izuku. She would realize that why not use him? After all, he does want to be a hero, and if he wants to be a hero so bad, who am I to stop his dreams? I'm his mother after all. I should be encouraging him on his dream. He should be able to become a hero, not because of the fact that he was dealt a bad hand, that he should just give up on his dream to anything. She was misguided, you could say. She was misguided. She had the right intentions in mind, but her execution, it just went south really, really quickly, to the point where she would end up experimenting with a child, constantly doing harm to her child over and over again. The stress caused his hair to go white. Her putting all of these chemicals into his body, these injections, all of this for the sake of science. She could hear him scream all of the time, but she would just tell him that this is for his own good. She was trying to find a way to give him a quake, and she was not going to just quit. She knew that it hurt, but he would have to just bear through the pain. He would have cuts and bruises all over his body from time to time, but eventually they ended up getting a breakthrough. One day, Izuku's eyes ended up becoming completely red from the damage as well. His skin was pale. He had these cuts and bruises, these wounds all over his body, but now they were starting to heal. Well, slightly. You see, the cuts didn't really completely disappear. Although the bruises, they began to heal, they ended up actually clearing up. That wasn't necessarily the same for the cuts. Those cuts would close up a little bit, but not completely. Instead, they would just be left like that for a while. You see how it is on the thumbnail? That's basically how Izuku would look for his life, you could say. Izuku also suffered from DID, dissociative identity disorder. He had a split personality. He needed to have this new set of personalities in order to cope with all of the torture that was going through him every single day. Every single day, Izuku was being tortured by his mother, all in the sake of science. Although she was saying that she was trying to give him a quirk, she was trying to help her son, she was trying to do all of this and that. Izuku didn't necessarily see it like that. He saw that his mother had just become evil, in a sense. She was no longer his caring mother that he knew for those 4 years of his life. She was just using him. She didn't necessarily want him anymore. She was just using him as a ploy for some science experiment that she was doing. What, for like some sort of science fair? Is that what she was trying to do? Was that what she was really trying to do to her own son? He despised her. He hated her. He didn't want anything to do with her. And of course, what ended up happening was, well, pretty obvious. Once Izuku actually did awaken his abilities, the very first thing he did was actually kill Inko. He was around 6 or 7 by this time, so about 3 years of torture. Izuku stopped going to school by the time he was around 5 years old, so his social interactions were kept to a minimum, especially when parents were starting to complain about Izuku having some wounds on him. Well, not just parents, I should say. Parents and teachers alike, they were starting to question where Izuku was getting these wounds, these cuts and bruises all over his body, and why was his hair turning white? What was the meaning behind this? Especially with the fact that they knew he was quirkless. So this whole thing with his hair, was he dyeing it or something? And if so, why was he dyeing his hair at such a young age? He was only 5. He was only 4. He was only 4 or 5 at the time. Why would he even know about dyeing his hair? He should have been out playing with the little kids outside, but no, he was staying inside. He was seemingly too weak to really even move much anymore. So the parents were trying to figure this out. They ended up going to Inko demanding answers, but she would just close her doors to them, saying, "This is my child. You guys don't need to worry about him. He is in safe hands. I am his mother after all. You guys don't have to worry about my son. I appreciate the concern, but you really must understand that Izuku is a clumsy child, and the whole reason why his hair is turning white is because of the fact that, well, this is a sort of latent gene that he has. It's a sort of genetic mutation. Although he's quirkless, that doesn't necessarily mean he can't contract something like albido or something. Albino, I meant to say. I don't know where albido came from. I guess I'm thinking too much of Ben 10. Anyways, the parents would still be suspicious of Inko, but decide to drop the topic when Izuku ended up leaving pre-K or kindergarten. Their reasoning behind this would have been that, well, Inko decided to just start to homeschool him instead. She decided to homeschool him because of the fact that she knew he could get a better education under her than what most teachers would be able to teach their students, and she wanted him to become just as intelligent and advanced as her. He wanted to be a hero, and if he wanted to be the very first quirkless hero ever, then Inko was going to let that happen. She needed him to become very intelligent really early on as well. That would have been all of the excuses that Inko was making up for why Izuku wasn't in school anymore. But by the time Izuku was 7 and finally discovered his powers, finally got in the hang of his blood manipulation and his regeneration, even if the regeneration was kind of slow right now. Well, the very first thing Izuku would do, and I've mentioned this before, is kill Inko. He would have killed Inko because of all of the suffering he had to go through, and he wanted revenge. He was unstable right now. He was incredibly unstable and would actually use his blood to literally, he would stab Inko in the heart and in many other places until he decided to just use a whip of blood and just slash her body in half. He would break out to the apartment that they were in. Scratch that. Not apartment, but house. Because of the fact that Inko, being a scientist, would be much more well off here. She would have been much more well off to the point where they could have actually afforded a house. And with a house, that also meant that she could also be doing her experiments much more quietly, much more inconspicuous, you could say, because of the fact that she was able to make sure that no one would be able to hear Izuku's noise, his screams, his cries out for help, all of that. And she only saw that she was doing what was best for Izuku throughout this whole time, though. She was only doing everything in Izuku's best interest. She wanted her kid to become strong and powerful. She wanted her kid to be the next All Might, but he just couldn't be that if he was quirkless. That's what Inko was trying to get through her son's mind, and that's why she was going through all of these experiments, but never would she have ever expected for him to turn out like this, to the point where he would have become so lost that he would turn around and kill his own mother. And then on top of that, what he would end up doing afterwards is literally go to town, causing mayhem all across the city. He would just start going on a killing spree, killing everybody and killing so many people everywhere all at once. It was a bloodbath, you could say. Everybody was dying to Izuku's artificial quake, his whips of blood, they just went through the buildings. They cut through the buildings like they were clay, you could say. Well, clay or butter. More like butter, actually. It wouldn't take too long for heroes to arrive on the scene, but when they saw what looked like a little child, that did catch them off guard, and of course, with that split second of hesitation, it would have been enough for Izuku to have actually seriously injured some of the pro heroes. Actually, some of them would have even been killed in the process. Izuku would have just swept through them like they were bugs to him. He would just cut through them. He would continue to go on this killing spree until more heroes would arrive on the scene. When more heroes ended up arriving on the scene, they would not have hesitated this time around, knowing what the other heroes had told them, and they would have actually put a stop to Izuku's killing spree. They would have ended up taking him to solitary confinement until they could figure out what to do with him. They realized that he had just killed pretty much like a quarter of his city's population, and just like that, which was kind of terrifying. Actually, a quarter is a bit too high. Let's say a fifth. We're going to say a fifth, actually. He had actually just killed a fifth of a city's population within what seemed like minutes. While most villains, it would take them much longer to even get so far. Some didn't even get that far. Some would only get like 1/20th of the population, or even less, just like maybe 2 or 3 people at best. So to find out that this kid managed to kill so many people within that short amount of time was almost unbelievable to most of the pro heroes, until they really looked back at the data, and the data didn't really lie. They tried to figure out what Izuku's quirk was, only to look into his documents and find that, well, he used to have green hair and green eyes, and in his documents it also said he was quirkless, but what they just saw there had to be some sort of quirk, an extremely powerful quirk, so they were starting to assume that he was a late bloomer, and if that was the case, what would cause him to lash out like this? Was it that his quirk awakening was just that violent, and sudden that it would have just caused him to go on such a rampage? Or was this from some underlying conditions as well? They saw some cuts and bruises over his body. Well, that was there from even before he started going on a rampage. Although they were slowly starting to heal. They didn't really understand this, because what they had figured out was that Izuku, he seemed to have some sort of blood manipulation quirk, sort of like Vlad King, but to a much higher degree. They were trying to figure this out, but they were only coming up to emptiness. They couldn't really figure out what was the deal with Izuku. They couldn't figure out why he was the way he was right now. They weren't able to figure out why he, suddenly awakened a quirk after all this time. Why was his hair white? Why was his eyes red? Why did he suddenly become an albino? What was the meaning behind all of this? That's what all of them were trying to get through their minds. Because looking at the looking at the dates, it seemed that Izuku was taken out of kindergarten at the age of 5, so they were questioning if his mother also had something to do with this. When they ended up trying to investigate the house, they would end up coming across a dead body, and some of them would actually puke because of the fact that this means that the kid was not just going on some indiscriminate kill rate, but his mother, she was on a kill list for him to have just killed her, and the way that she was killed was only synonymous to quirk users who had slashing type quirks. They would have also checked the DNA, and of course it would have been Izuku written all over it. They didn't know what to really do with the child considering how young he was, but at the same time they couldn't just allow him to get away scot-free. They couldn't allow him to get away empty. So the next thing the next best thing that they could really do was to, well, put him in some sort of juvenile detention center, you could say. Some sort of place to remediate himself. Try and figure out what went wrong. Why did such a sweet and loving child suddenly just become wicked? I'm not even speaking English right now. What would have caused such a sweet and innocent little child to have gone on some sort of genocide run? This is the only thing that you could really call it at this point: indiscriminate killing. All of this that was happening. What was the reason behind this? What was the reason behind why a little kid like him would do such a thing? Why was this quirk so powerful as well? They had even brought in a eraser head to try and erase this quirk, but for some reason it wasn't properly erasing. At times it would begin to erase, but at the same time it wouldn't even completely erase though. Instead it would have had something, it would have actually instead messed with his mind. It wouldn't have necessarily erased the quirk itself. The quirk was still going. Maybe not as strong as it was originally, but it was still going. That's what Aizawa realized. And on top of that, when it came onto his mental state, it started to revert back to that of a little child. He was in some sort of innocent state, as if he wasn't aware of his past actions. He wasn't aware of what he had just done, which was weird to Aizawa, and they would especially decide to continue to keep him in solitary confinement. They didn't want him to hang around other kids right now. They needed to get behind why he was acting the way he was. Every time that Aizawa let his gaze every time that Aizawa would blink and stop using his quirk, Izuku would just go into a crazed state, a rabid state, as if he had rabies or something. They didn't really understand it, but that's what was going on with Izuku. Every day they would try and figure some stuff out. They would research on him, try and get some blood samples, and Izuku was just getting sick of it all. Every time he would try to escape, but they would always bring him right back down. They would find a way to tamper with his systems. They would bring Aizawa in each and every time in order to control him. He was seemingly the only person that could really control Izuku right now, and Izuku despised Aizawa because of that. He was constantly going through mood shifts every single day. Every single day he felt like he didn't belong. Every single day he felt like he wasn't in his own body, and he just wanted to be free. He would use his blood manipulation sometimes in order to actually kill some other scientists. He would have stabbed into them. He would have tried to escape. He would have done everything in his capability, but every single time he would just be brought back by Aizawa using his capturing tape and his erasure quake, which once again it did not necessarily erase Izuku's quake, but it seriously did dampen his abilities and his mental state. They hated it. They despised everything. They despised everything to the point where they would just start to count down their days. They would go through the mental and physical abuse every day. Every day they would be subject to scientists experimenting on him. Every day he was trying to escape. Every day he was trying to just be free. Every day he just wanted freedom. Every day he just wanted to be loved. This was the curse of Izuku. All because he was born quakeless. He just wanted to die, really. Over a decade would pass and Izuku would have become a fully grown adult, although the way he interacted with others was far different from how a normal adult should be able to act. He was stuck in the mind state of a child. He was stuck in the mind state of a child for most of the time, unless he was let out of his cell, where he would actually take on the personality of a cold-blooded killer. His mental state would continue to just depreciate, and it would just devolve to what seemed like a caveman. At this point, he wouldn't even really be speaking words, but instead, he would just find a way to escape. He would find a way to escape and try to cause as much chaos as possible. This would actually start to make its way outside of, well, the laboratory that the scientists were experimenting on him in. They would have found out a while ago that Izuku had this special bone, this double joint in his bone. That meant that he was quakeless, but at the same time, that didn't really add up with how he was able to do all of these abilities. And then they would also discover that although he was technically quakeless, at the same time he had an artificial quake. This artificial quake was what they were researching on for the last couple of years. That's why he was stuck in this cell for pretty much his whole life at this point. Every day they would have been researching on him, and one day though, they would have actually reached the point of success in duplicating these abilities. They would have called these artificial quakes the branches of sin. And as soon as they discovered this though, this would make its way all across the underworld of Japan. This would eventually make its way to a person by the name of All For One. When they ended up hearing about these branches of sin and how they could grant you artificial quakes, alongside maybe regeneration to the most extreme degree, he was interested. He wasn't going to lie, he was very interested. He could actually use this and gather an army of artificial quake users, all under his control. Maybe use a bit of brainwashing in the process as well. And so he would find out the location of the laboratory, find out the location of the test subject, and he would send some of his best men to actually collect this information and the test subject. What ended up happening in the end was that All for One would have successfully captured Izuku in the laboratory. This whole lab, it was basically set ablaze, and well, all of the information about these artificial quakes, they would have been taken, they would have been confiscated, they would have been sent to All for One for him and Dr. Ujigo to read, to look over all of this and that, and all of this good stuff. What ended up happening in the very end, though, was that Izuku was finally he was finally free from that prison. He would look over to All for One and realize that if it weren't for him, he would have still been stuck in there, getting tortured every single day. And so he decided to thank him by pledging his loyalty to All for One, and this would have been out of his complete free will. All for One would have been interested, especially knowing what he did just a decade ago. At the age of 7, he was able to cause mass genocide. Once he had just awakened his artificial quake, he now wondered what this boy would be capable of at the age of 17, at this new age. And I'm saying it from right now, UA is going to still be a high school. At this time around, they would be around their second year of high school. They would have been in their second year of UA, and in this time, what would end up happening is that they wouldn't have gone through the same things as canon. Everything that has happened in canon has not happened yet. And in this timeline, Mirio would have one for all. Mirio would also be a hero, a full-fledged hero at this point, and is quickly going up the ranks. Even making giving Hawks a run for his money, you could say. So yes, that's basically how I'm going to end it off right now. There's going to be a lot of death probably in this series. And yeah, King Titan X out. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe.